the use of color doesn't necessitate the use of changing color. In fact, if you just want blue, you should probably just get blue. And in my personal thing, this is a place where you hold specs, right? Like, because we're designing a really complex system here. This is a technology. You don't oftentimes make people change out their IT systems. Lighting can only reflect the values of the actual surface that it has to bounce off of, right? And color can turn, something beautiful into something more beautiful, or into something, awful.
Welcome to the Light Pod, built by Lada. This is the #1 podcast for thought-provoking and inspirational conversations when it comes to the people, the process, and the product of design, all with a little love for lighting in it. I'm your host, Sam Corbel, and today we welcome Kate Furst to the studio for a conversation around dreaming in color, what it means when you see color on a building, color in a space, but it's intentionally there. And it's intentionally moving or not moving. But basically what it's doing isn't just because the button said, this is what you can't do. It's more around what you should do. This conversation is made possible thanks to our partner, Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale creates luminaires that go beyond expectations in healthcare environments, focusing on the people and well-being, not just spaces or treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's impact and you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. Now let's get to know our guests a little bit more. Kate, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing great.
You started off as a theater kid, which is one story that people take into this industry. At what point in time do you feel like that passion and love for theatrical lighting transformed itself into the more architectural challenges and projects?
I love lighting because it tells stories. I love lighting because it's the emotional glue that holds any of those pieces and places together. Whether you know it or not, right? Like it's building the visual hierarchy and the spaces that you're inhabiting and you're existing in, fundamentally with visibility. And so I think it occupies this really beautiful place in that world. And then I think the technical challenges of it have always been really appealing to me, and that sort of like science side of my brain. And so I think that for me, that marriage of like, it's powerful and beautiful and artistic and packed with story, meeting like it's hard and it's technical and there are so many bits and pieces to it. Like I love that marriage of the art and science.
Why do you think people are just naturally interested, curious, attracted, or gravitate to light when it's not pure white light?
Well, I mean, all light has a color, right? Like, I mean, even if we're using a light on the black body curve, its relative location on that curve has color. So there's no color-free light. Daylight has all the colors, right? Like every lighting is an intentional choice for color, whether or not you're making that with a specific purpose or, that sort of thing is different. But there have been all sorts of stories, and studies done about like our emotional connection to color. Like it's right up there with like taste and smell, where color intrinsically means something to us on an emotional level. And so I think that color is a really powerful tool to like capture human imagination, to take you back to something, to connect you with a certain feeling, with a certain emotion, or a certain time of day. It establishes a sense of place or lack of place, right? Like, I mean, it's the key part to naturalistic or outside supernatural.
The fact that we have our five senses, the visual system is something that naturally we're going to respond to when things happen that are not expected or foreign. But you mentioned how color becomes something that's attractive to us. Do you know any more about the science behind that, or have you been able to research or read anything?
So there's a lot of research that's been done in like the advertising field for color, right? Like when you tie a logo with a color, people are more likely to remember that than just it having black and white. And so, because it's an additional layer of association. The other thing that's interesting about color that people don't always think about is that color isn't universal. Our associations with color aren't universal. So Western association of like good and evil, like good is usually blue, right? Like our police officers' uniforms and like, Superman and all of that kind of stuff. That's blue, right? And then evil is usually red. But in Eastern cultures, that's reversed. Like in China, the good guy wears red. Red is good luck, like all of these sorts of other things. And so I think it's because we have a whole lifetime to build up that association, right? Like, I mean, you imprint on colors. We have this special association with sunsets and things like that, right? Like that warm amber firelight thing, but that's built in the human experience. That's not inherent in all of us.
I know you come from theater, and color's probably just been a part of you and how you think about lighting, and it's second nature to you. But if you can unpack Kate's brain for us, where do you think the interesting points of color in a lit environment are important, and what always drives you and helps you create that opportunity?
I think that it's also light over time, right? Like I think, the sun does this naturally for us throughout the day. We don't live in a static world. Color isn't static for us in our human experience. And so when we're spending time in the built environment, even if it's you moving through a space and experiencing different kinds of color and different kind of materiality, that's still change, right? Like that's still differentiation. And so I think in terms of like design application, all of those things feel good. And I like placemaking too. Does that make any sense? So for me, like I want to move through a building and experience different spaces. I want to move through a site and experience, different zones and different, feelings.
You said something very interesting that I'm sure is intuitive to you, but always raises the question. Light is something we see, yet you mentioned how it makes you feel. Daylight, you said earlier, is all the colors, right? White light, picking up a color on the black body curve is another thing. But the color light really evokes emotion, right? And emotion is far beyond that sense of what you see. Talk to me a little bit more about what it means for you to think through the feeling that someone has in a space because color exists.
Like I said, we have these like intrinsic milestones that we have in our brains, like connections to color, connections to firelight or candlelight or things like that are going to pluck certain pieces of you. Like if you have a relationship with dark and light too, positive and negative lighting, highlights and dark spaces, the ability to retreat into those different parts of the room, right? Like you and I were talking about before, like I am uncomfortable in bright light. I would much prefer to go to my dark corner of the room and be an observer, right, of a situation. And so I think making room for all of those experiences in the spaces where, you can feel glowing and important and luminous, and where you can retreat and feel observational, or like all of those experiences are different for everyone. And so I think that's why variation in spaces is important.
You've alluded to it a little bit already, but when you think about the experiences people are having and how they're feeling, as a designer, it's your job to lay that out. It's your job to understand and think about how all these things and moments are going to happen. Obviously, we're talking about one component, which is light. But what do you feel like you do when you're working through a project to command the fact that this thing, this light, this color is going to make an impact, as opposed to someone saying, well, we got colored light, let's push the RGB wheel and see what happens?
I am a lighting designer, and I am only one member of the team that determines how these things look and feel, right? So I'm working with a team of other people, especially for the built environment, right? Lighting can only reflect the values of the actual surface that it has to bounce off of, right? So if I don't have that part of the spectrum, or if I'm missing some piece of it, then that obviously impacts the color. I'm never going to overcome, well, I should never overcome like what the materiality color is doing. Part of what we're doing is telling the story of those properties, right? Like and in enhancing and building upon what that environmental thing is doing. So, we're responding to that, and it's sort of like the game of tennis, right? Where you are bouncing that back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And, can I pick up on the reds in that, or do I want to cool it down? And so I think that when we talk about designing with color, all of these things come into mind. And I think that it can give like a new dynamicism to an environment, right? Like it can turn something familiar into something foreign, and color can turn, something beautiful into something more beautiful, or into something, awful, right?
Where in your design process do you have to move from listening to engaging to make sure that people understand, hey, there's more to what's happening in this, there's more to what's going to happen in this room than what you think, because I'm over here and I'm about to apply something unique to the space?
Color for me is story and emotion, and all of those things rolled up into one. So, with the design team, that should be part of the inception of the conversation. For example, we just did an exhibit at the Getty. We're lighting this altarpiece, which is really beautiful. So it's a gold altarpiece with the carvings of, Jesus and the apostles and all of that kind of stuff. And it was carved to be location specific. And so it was carved to go in the nave of this beautiful cathedral. And this beautiful cathedral had side windows on either side of the nave. So in the morning it was lit one way, and in the evening it was lit another way. And then they would have nighttime services and have candles from below it, right? And so if you look at the way these faces are carved, they're intentionally carved to catch light from those angles and to look different under each one of those conditions. So it's not a naturalistic face. It's not like the face that you and I, in terms of its shape, would expect a face to be. If they're actually like kind of football pointed kind of things, and then one eye is carved a little differently than the other eye because of the angle the light was coming through these windows. And I guess they had just done a recent scholarly article about the history of this altarpiece and how all of these different lighting conditions affected the way it rendered, right? It appeared. And the curators were talking to us and they were like, so we just don't know how to light it. Like, we don't know, should we light it like this so that it would be like the morning? Should we light it like this? It's night. And so we sat down and we were like, you don't have to pick. Like, we can do this. We can show the range of it. Like, we can show the full range, and we can, adjust the light and the color over time so that people can see the different ways that it would have been viewed. And they were like, oh my God, really? Like, but I think pulling all of those emotions together and then seeing how, this artist thought about his work and how it was going to be viewed and the different stories that the church was trying to tell over these different kinds of day, exposing all of that is, one of the cool things we kind of get to do. And I think we can do that in modern architectural spaces as well, right? Like we have some ability to say, okay, what story are we trying to tell with this building, with this space, with this facade? Are we lighting a bank that wants to look robust and indelible and indestructible, right? Like that's one story. Are we trying to light a delicate art museum with lots of carvings or experiences, or is it a Geary design where it's just twisting and wants to feel like ethereal and impossibly light? The lighting is key to accomplishing all of that, and how we choose the tints or the tones of color or big, bold statement pieces matter in terms of the story and the environment. And so when you're talking to clients, the way that they want to receive your guests, before you and I sat down and had this conversation, you were talking about like, this is my design. You said you moved the furniture around this room for like hours, right?
Like literally 2 hours. Yeah.
So, and you picked these angles, you picked how you wanted people to feel when they sat in this chair. You picked the distance that you and I are sitting apart. You created this experience, right? For me and for the other people that you're going to bring in here and welcome into your podcast. And so you wanted it to feel comfortable and homey and relaxed, right? And I do. And that to me is part of the magic, right?
Thank you. I appreciate it. It certainly is always a challenge to get the environment right. I want to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to dive into it a little bit more with you. That magic of color, what it takes to maybe more technically assess the needs, the requirements, the environment. And we can pick on things like the altar, and I'm sure there's a few more stories in your bucket of where you might not think you want colored light, but it actually reveals the magic of that environment you're trying to create. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
This conversation is brought to you in partnership with Nightingale, lighting powered by purpose. Nightingale develops luminaires that deliver beyond the usual expectation of what they should do in healthcare environments. As an expert medical brand, they make lighting about people, not just spaces, about feeling well, not just treatment. If you're passionate about lighting's positive impact on people, you want to discover the latest lighting innovations, and you also want to share your thoughts about the future of lighting, they'd love to hear from you. Visit nightingalelighting.com/discover to know more. Welcome back to the podcast. As you can tell, Kate has a lot of ideas around what it means to not only utilize color, but create an experience with it. Ironically, color doesn't necessarily mean RGB. It can be a variation of a white color temperature. It can be created from a variety of different sources. And there's actually some technologies that have been around for way longer than LED has that also introduce color. Kate, talk to me just a little bit more about when you kind of put your toolkit on the desk in terms of saying, I love color. I try to put it in every project in some fun way, or I think about it in a second nature. What tools you have today and what gets you excited about that?
For me, like I said, it starts with a reason. So I think, starting with like our clients' why, and then building into like that emotion and that feeling is part of it. And so oftentimes what that practically looks like are conversations, these sort of searching conversations, right? Like, oh, I want to be able to see my building from the highway. Or, oh, I want to make sure that my building, which is downtown, is commensurate with the other downtown buildings, or just all of the different layers of goals and feelings that the client has. And then I think when we're introducing some of these things that people might not be as familiar with or might not feel as comfortable with, like color, a lot of mood boards and renderings and, establishing a visual vocabulary really early, like before you're choosing your lighting fixtures, before you're choosing, detailing the locations in the grade and, all of these sorts of things, starting with that baseline, like here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's the palette that we're trying to achieve that with, works really well. And I think that, feeds into some of what we talked about later, right? Like the loose color wheel of doom that might have unintended consequences and all of those sorts of other things. If everybody comes into it from the inception with like a sharpened goal and a vision for why we're doing this, then I think that's really helpful. And when we're doing that, we now have a lot of those why pieces. And then oftentimes this is also when we'll have conversations about like responsible application of color. And to me, this is where we key into like dark sky and animal well-being and light trespass and all of those sorts of important parts of the conversation too. And oftentimes this is what's like, so we're going to have a control system. Like that's what a lot of that boils down to.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of lights. They're going to do some stuff and we'll get to it. But yeah, we're going to control them. Mm-hmm. We'll come back to that in a minute, right?
Because that's responsible.
Because it is responsible. That visual vocabulary that you spoke to earlier, that you paint with your client, that you present and start to get people to go from, I want this, I want it to look like that, to, let's create a streak, or let's brush this, or let's, elevate that texture, or let's saturate that. I'm sure these are words that start to come into that conversation. As that starts to happen, at what point in time does your mindset shift from design intent to the practicalities of being able to execute on that vision?
Ideally, in my perfect world, it's when that vision kind of crystallizes for the rest of the design team. It's when we can start referring to the facade lighting as the desert sunset light. Like, okay, when we're creating our desert sunset, here's what we're going to do. Or, when we're creating, the strong column concept, this is what we're going to do. Or, when we're doing that horizontal cornice, this is, and so like, and I feel like establishing it, giving it that sort of proper name kind of thing helps everybody kind of get on board for you to execute it. And so when it comes to doing those details, people are more willing to be like, oh, let's get you there. Right? Like, because we've all coalesced around this vision for this project, and, we've all invested in what that says about our building or our project, right? It gets people a little bit more excited. Sometimes you have to hedge. You throw a lot of stuff at it. half of it's still there when you're done. But if you're not sure if those ingrained fixtures are going to work, and you also put in accent fixtures mounted to the building or those sorts of things, that's a reality of how things work.
There's two things that have never changed in mankind: the concept of gravity and the concept of Mother Nature. Trying to defy them, aka rain in the ground, is definitely difficult. There's so many options today. It used to just be one RGB floodlight, and now people are doing all kinds of fascinating things to create dynamic lighting systems that come out of a form factor.
I mean, again, it comes back to the project. Is like, what kind of building is this? What kind of institution is it? What is the client's ability to maintain it? What is what are the client's directives in terms of desire, and how those things drive everything, right? Really, really drive everything. I will say that, in terms of the fact that, 10 years ago, we had one RGBW fixture. It was like, okay, how are we going to fit that if we want to do something? And how are we going to fit this one thing on the project to be able to do that? The baseline desire is what goes to that. And as you and I were discussing before, the use of color doesn't necessitate the use of changing color. So, it is possible for you to say, I want blue, right? But that doesn't mean you need a RGBW fixture. In fact, if you just want blue, you should probably just get blue. And maybe that's 3 different color blue chips, because now we can get a royal blue chip, a deep blue chip, and potentially like an indigo chip or something like that. And so now you could really hone in on the exact part of the blue spectrum you're after, right? If you want to change that. So, I mean, we have all these tools at our disposal now where we can really be a lot more thoughtful and conscientious about getting the exact hue that we're after. And so maybe you can figure that out with lighting gels and use dichroic lenses. That's a really durable solution for projects. So, there are a lot of different ways to think through the application and evaluate it. And honestly, maybe that's less expensive in the long term, right? I think that there's a lot of room in the kind of technology and how it's evolved, with the application of exterior color changing lights to be able to use wireless technologies and, control things that way. Data over power is becoming more prominent, and the ability to use Bluetooth or wireless mesh networks is real now and stable for the most part. So, we have a lot of options for how to be able to apply things and control them. But for me, it all kind of goes back to that baseline with the client, and we build upon that, right? So if we've finished our concept, we've identified all the things we want to do, we're getting into drawings, we're choosing specifications. And in my personal thing, this is a place where you hold specs, right? Because we're designing a really complex system here. This is a technology. You don't oftentimes make people change out their IT systems. So, if you can frame it as that when we're doing this kind of complex system, I think that that's important. And so, we're putting together this IT network if we're doing a fully controllable color changing dynamic system. We're approaching it that way, and we're mapping out, detailing where all these fixtures go, detailing the angles, detailing the beam spreads, putting all of that work together in these documents to capture what the lighting's doing. I'm also a huge fan of mock-ups. I'm working on a project right now that has a 3D printed mesh that's draping over a facade. So, all of the detail that goes into that, even in a model, is hard, right? Because The architect didn't even put all the detail in the 3D printed mesh in the model. So there's a lot that goes into those pieces that sometimes mock-ups, help galvanize everybody in terms of like, this is the right thing. Let's get after it. Let's do it right. And those sort of pieces, and then it's really making sure that you're looking after it. And I know it sounds strange, but like telling the story to the contractors, reiterating what you're trying to achieve to everybody in that design process.
And you're talking specifically
people
about like
buy in.
This is what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
Like not this is where I need these wires. Like, hey, I want you to understand the labor that you're putting into this system and what the outcome result.
Mm-hmm. It helps everybody buy into that vision, right? And now somebody's looking out for you, and somebody's looking out for your vision because you've sold them the Kool-Aid too, right? Like, they're in this, they're a part of it, they're part of telling that story. And so, like, if the person pulling those wires is like, I think I might make a shadow, like, don't you want him to like be like, I'm going to check myself. I'm going to run that conduit a little to the left, right? Like, that, all of those things can make a difference. And so taking the time to invest to get a contractor kickoff meeting, maybe to putting a rendering in your drawing package, sort of thing, detailing what you're trying to achieve helps get everybody in your vision, right?
I know we're moving through this at lightning speed compared to where we could dive into it, but you create this appreciation and opportunity to take color and put it into space, letting kind of that whole project dynamic spin itself into what is a supposed outcome. I love how you said it's about getting buy-in from everyone, including that contractor. But the ultimate result only takes shape once it's installed, turned on, and properly controlled. Talk to me a little bit about what it takes to, obviously, a control system is a control system, and theoretically it should work, but understanding and working with people to discuss, well, what do we want to control and when do we want to control it? Who are those stakeholders, and how do you approach your conversations around creating the right deliverable to make sure that actually happens?
So some clients want some control over their destiny and want to be able to take the reins and do certain things. But most of them don't, right? Like, I mean, most of them really want something that works reliably, that they're happy with. And so if you can back that up and say, it's going to come on at sunset every day. There's an astronomical time clock. It knows when sunset is. Like, it's going to come on for you every day. It's going to turn off at this time every night. You don't have to worry about it. It's there. I think that kind of comfort goes a long way, and I'm a big fan of building that level of like repetition into the system. If you do overrides, sometimes you can make them temporary and things like that. And building as much as they, like if they just want to be able to extend hours to keep it on for 2 hours longer because of a special event, putting all of those pieces in. I know when I can sell it to owners and companies, I really try to get a secondary visit in, sometime 6 months after they've been occupying the space, to sort of do a touch up and make sure at least it's an option in the proposal kind of thing, that they can bring us back and say, okay, it needed to be a little bit different, or, my experience in using this is X, or, it's going to feel this way. So I think there's a lot to it. And like we said, lighting and color in particular is powerful, and people have a lot of opinions about it. And so just knowing that it's not permanent helps people, right? Like, and so if to me, you're doing that in terms of like we talked about with static colors and things like that, either establishing it in the mock-ups or establishing it with a gel and then changing it out for a dichroic when everybody likes it, or knowing that you put in a dynamic system that can always be adjusted, is helpful.
What do you feel like you've done to create that successful collaboration with the other side of the table in terms of like, what do you ask them, or how do you guide them, or maybe it's just as simply as what do you show them to force them to make decisions?
I think I really do approach each one of my clients as individuals. And so there are certain people I work with who don't understand what they can't see, right? And so everything has to be real and tangible to them. And so, for those people, it's like, here's the fixture. This one's substantial, that one's crappy. Like, touch it. I think you'll see the difference too. Like, I will have them shipped to your office. Like, trust me, I'll take half of those. So, some people are like that. And then other people are like, I just want to know that it's going to be right. And then, we're just talking about that side of it. And so I think I really do approach everyone as individuals and try to take the piece of the experience that they're locked in on and turn those screws, right? Like, yeah, I mean, we were talking about the bridge project before. My lynch key with him is that he was really interested in legacy and impact, like community impact, and having a lasting, durable legacy for the community that he was creating. And so the fact that seasonally that would change and the monument would be something that adapted and grew with the community, and that there was good visibility of this bridge from the residential area not quite the residential, but the commercial area in terms of it, and also with the drivers moving through this area. It was really important to him that it be a statement and that it be his legacy. And so, a lot of what we were talking about there would be like, well, we want that durability. We want to make sure that it's impactful over the long haul, that it's reliable in terms of its function. And so, I think finding that piece and really understanding your client is key.
Is there a story? Is there a project? Is there something that you just have to laugh at and smile and say, wow, I can't believe it worked?
So many of it, I tie back to people in relationships too. And so, I'm so grateful I am where I am in my career. And I owe that to, a lot of the mentors I've had: Don Hollingsworth, Lisa Passamonte Green, Stephen Rosen, before that, Ruth Hudson, and, some of the theatrical people, Jim Gage. And so, all of these people, like, were so generous with their knowledge and their experience. And so, when I think about these projects, oftentimes it's like those small moments with the people who have mentored me, and that I hope I'm passing along to some of the people that I mentor too, right? Where it's like, this is going to work, right? And so, that can be something as simple as like, hey, one more light, and it should be in that tree, not below that tree, hey, did I tell you about the time that, I put put this light behind, this perforated metal panel, and it had this really cool reaction. And so I think it's like what sticks with me are some of those moments where, standing with a client and being like, that really put life in this project, like it was an empty shell and it didn't have a soul, and the light injects that into the space, and it infuses that indelible kind of feeling. I think that's all the good stuff.
It provokes that emotion, that sense of feeling through your visual system.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really powerful impact. This has been such a fun conversation to, dive into not only what dreaming in color can be, but how to think through it, how to make sure that it really truly is always tailored to what the client, what the need of that environment is. Because if we don't get it already, Kate's 19 years of experience proves to us no two projects are the same, especially when it comes to the need of color, the emotional response they're trying to get. And also, it sounds like who might be writing that check?
No, and I think that looking after all of those different phases and all of those different people who are collaborating with you, to me, that's where it goes back to like the beginning, and it goes back to the idea and the kind of feeling you're creating. Because after that, when you start having to cut things or make compromises, then you have a North Star, right? Like, I mean, you have the thing you're trying to do, or that you need to adjust it. You need to find a new North Star, and you need to get everybody else on board for that, right? Like, I mean, that becomes the really big touch point, right?
Anchoring the North Star, anchoring that touch point really is what will drive it forward. Kate, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for your time. If people have questions, if they want to pick your brain a little bit more or talk about what it means to dream in color with you, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
They can email me at kate@availablelight.com, and I'm always happy to. And then again, I just have to shout out to my collaborator, Dawn Hollingsworth, and all of her contributions and just guidance and mentorship of me throughout my career.
If you don't have a mentor who's teaching you something about light, about color, about just the experience they've had and what that might be able to help you do when you need just one more light, I think Kate's got a gentle reminder for us all. Go find him. You'll be happy you did.
You can call me.
Call Kate. She'll help you out too. Kate, thanks.
I can talk your ear off for 2 hours.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the conference here in San Diego and reconnecting with so many people in the lighting industry. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Hey, it's Sam. Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Light Pod. In case you didn't know, this entire episode was actually also produced with a video attached to it. So make sure wherever you listen to this, you think about watching it next time. It's amazing the connection you'll have when you not only listen, but you watch the brilliant minds who join us to celebrate the people, the process, and the product behind design. Until the next episode, stay brilliant, be bold, and never let your inspiration go. I'll talk to you soon. See ya.